Hi everybody, I'm back again, and I'm here with another chapter. This time I'm going to be reading A Voice in the Darkness, chapter 13. I am well through this story by now, so if you're just tuning in tonight, I highly recommend you go back to past broadcasts and listen to those ones. If you are interested in other stories, you can go back to, I have a whole bunch of different stories on this channel, so feel free to just browse. But without further ado, I'm just going to launch into this one. This one is A Voice in the Darkness, chapter 13. It actually required 2 guards, with a hand from Doleg, to roll the thing away. Padra came limping in, showing a bad bruise on his temple, but didn't bother trying to help. Won't be much good for anything that requires heavy work for a day or two. Doleg concentrated on freeing Borlus. The wizard seemed to be little the worse for wear, save a small scratch on his left temple. The sword he had called up was gone again, but there was a rent on the chest of the thing, such as would be made by a sword thrust. Shall we summon a healer? No thank you, Lord Prince. I only have a few bruises, which I can salve for myself. The real problem is that I've worn myself out with the magic I've done tonight. I'll have to ask one of your guards to give me a shoulder to lean on to get me to my bed. But in a day or so, I'll be fine. Unfortunately, if one of Golani's shamans sends his little boy assistant to cast a spell on you during that time, you'll have to find someone else to protect you. I'll do better than that. Here, take my arm. You don't have to do this yourself, Lord Prince. Third God's toe. What less could I do? I had to stand up there like a lump while you saved my most princely hide. No, you guards can accompany us, but this task is mine. The guards, looking nervous and embarrassed, accompanied them. The thought had crossed his mind that the guards would probably prefer to fight a dozen magical constructs barehanded than walk through like this through the hallways seemingly full of gaping servants while their prince did the work. He settled Borlus onto his bed. Is there anything else I can do for you? No, I think you've scandalized our guard and your court sufficiently for one day, don't you? Go on, go away and let an old man rest. So Doleg and the guards went back through the hallways. Padra was resting in Doleg's quarters with a cup of wine in hand. Some guards and servants were eyeing the lump of hides in the middle of the floor. None of them actually wanted to be the first to touch it, but none of them were really willing to admit that fact. Get rid of it, Doleg said. They looked at him, horror in their faces. Lord Prince, it's full of magic and bad luck. Third God's toe. It's about as full of magic as my boot right now. Go on, cut it up and haul it out for burning. Or would you like me to cut it up for you? He stepped forward, beginning to pull his sword. No, Lord Prince, that won't be necessary. One of the guards gave the sewn hides a tentative chop, and seeing that it did not retaliate in any fashion, he slashed at it again. Shortly, they were working at it with nervous energy, powered by the fear that the thing might suddenly come back to life. Doleg watched for a moment, then turned to Padra. What happened to you? I was very nobly defending the riverward gate for my prince, having worked out that was the rational route, if the thing worked on anything like rationality. Without warning, the gate shivered into splinters and chunks, one of which caught me across the head. When I came to, it was gone, so I started this way. I apparently took a couple other knocks because I'm bruised all up the side, and my right knee doesn't quite work properly. You're lucky you took those knocks. That thing wasn't stopping for ordinary weapons. Yes, I saw the mess on the walls there. Poor fool. Couldn't accept my offer to stay out of the way, so he tried to stop the god's rotted thing and failed. Going to have to call him a hero, though. He did die uselessly, disobeying my orders. Padra nodded. Right, can't have the guards taking the wrong message here. This fight is useless. I better save my own hide. It's good the thing came through at night rather than daytime when the streets would have been full of people. You think we'd be lucky enough to have the only people killed out there being the ones who are out after dark for no good reason? No, it seldom works out that well. We'll have a couple of widowed mothers killed while out trying to find food for their children. Dolek made a sour face. I suppose we ought to have messengers out to round up the people who fled outside the town to let them know it's safe to come back now. I'd almost as soon let them starve out there. But we still need them. Padra looked up past Doleg and smiled. Ah, here's the consort come to claim her bed. They came to tell me the thing was dead and that my child still had a father, so I might as well come back. The attack by the shaman's construct delayed their departure for Plutarch by several days. Padra was not up to riding immediately, and after 2 days he was still hurt badly enough, even with his ribs slightly strapped, that he could barely manage a full day's ride. In the meantime, word came from Plutarch that the imperial agent had not spent his time in hiding idly. Listen to this, Padra. He appears to have organized something of a resistance in the city, mostly among merchants for whom trade with the Empire is most important. There is also some evidence that he or his organization helped with the arrangement of the assassination attempt. Padra smiled slightly. Seems we underestimated our friend Oring Fa. We didn't think he was up to much for organization and management. I suppose one never really knows what a person can do until he's put into a place where his life depends on what he does. True enough. I wonder if they've been able to get his whole network back there. They make it sound as if they're not entirely sure. I don't really need a bunch of people plotting down in Plutarch. A bunch more, I mean. I'm fairly sure there's a dozen or so plots going on all the time. This is Length Wheel, after all. You could have let Tapral have the seat, you know. Doleg gave Padra a look. What, and go running off to take shelter in the Empire? Or maybe with the Kishnappids? Tapral, or rather Ladavant, wouldn't dare allow me to live, to be the continual focus of plots. And even in exile, I'd be in danger all the time that my hosts, whoever they might be, would turn me over for some political advantage or other. No, I pretty much had to either be prince or dead. Prince is a shade preferable. Padra grinned. We'll have to take Togatai and his people along. It's come all the way up to your princely years, has it? I suppose I shouldn't really be surprised. We spent all these years learning to hate Nanisas on the border. It's hard for some people to realize that not all Nanisas are our enemies. How'd you figure it was going out there between the rivers? Doleg grimaced. With any luck, the federated Nanisas and our garrisons will be able to get used to each other gradually. There shouldn't be any call for them to mix with each other on a regular basis. Let the trust between them grow over time, and our commanders can use whatever punishments are necessary to keep their troops in line. But you can't trust Ihark to do the same? Oh, I think I could trust him, but it'd be best not to have Togatai and his people continually in the faces of the garrison. The Federates and our garrisons out between the rivers have their own territories, and neither should go into the other's land without permission. Here, the garrison can't help but cheek and jowl beside the Nanisas. A little weak, Dolia. You sure it's not that you want your tame Nanisas with you? Doleg grinned. You make it sound as if I'm collecting exotic pets. I want to learn as much as I can about the Nanisas, how they think, how they act, in this situation or that. You'll have to admit that this sort of thing can be useful. It helps that Togatai is a personable sort. Yes, kids like him a lot, you know. He's always got a mob of little Nanisas hanging around him, and often is like not, a little Lantho or two who've slipped away from their mothers. That'll be part of the problem, of course. Frantic mothers finding their children wandering around with a nasty Nanissa brutes and complaining to their husbands. Doleg's eyes rose. I hadn't heard that particular one. I could see the problem, of course, since everyone knows that Annissa's either children becomes a serious difficulty. You don't think that's going to ease off much in Plutarch? I hope that at least it won't be quite so extreme. Elbdarg has continually lived with the fear of Dionysus for years. Plutarch is a little further from the frontier, so the stress shouldn't be quite so bad. I'll have a word of Togatai, though. Lord Prince, you honor me greatly. I wanted to talk with you, but rather than summon you and have you worrying about what I might want, and rather you'd done something wrong, and whether you'd done something wrong. The young Anissa smiled. So, you and your guard have come to seek me out, making me more worried. Doleg chuckled. No, I assure you, you are not at fault. Not in my eyes, at least. He looked around. Yes, there were 5 children present, and one of them was not Anissa. All the little dark eyes looked at him curiously. None of them yet at the age where they could recognize strangers that strangers might be dangerous. You've gathered quite a fine court here. Togatai looked around. The little ones? Yes, they seem to like me. Some Lantha mothers are afraid for their children. For their children? Togatai frowned in puzzlement. Why should I harm their children? Doleg thought of the horrors he'd seen around destroyed villages and homesteads, but sensed that bringing that up would not be useful. Nissas have been our enemies for years, and it's hard to make a sudden change from enemy to trusted ally. What I'd like myself is for the Lantha and their children to learn as much as possible your people and their ways. Even I, though, cannot command the Lantha mothers to give trust overnight. And I'd like you and your people to come to Plutarch with us. Togatai's expression was blank. Will the mothers of Plutarch be that much more trusting? Perhaps a little. However, I myself would like to learn more about the Anissas. To that end, it seems best to keep you by me. I see. The Annissa's expression eased a little. We plan to leave tomorrow. If you can't be ready to travel that soon, you should come up as soon as possible. I'll assign an escort to keep the locals from bothering you along the way. Togatai grinned. You insult us, Lord Prince. The Anissas do not take long to prepare for a move. We'll be with you tomorrow. The trip to Plutarch was a long and uneventful one. Uneventful if one did not count the occasional wagon breakdown, several creeks being turned to raging rivers by excessive fall rains, and roads turned to bogs by hundreds of marching feet. 5 nights out of Plutarch, making allowance for the atrocious marching conditions, Doleg asked Padra, How are you holding up? Your face is gray as ash. Should I try and tell you I'm fine? Fact is, I'm about 2 steps away from camping for a week beside the road. The only thing that keeps me moving is the knowledge that I've even worse traveling after the army's messed up the road for me. Not to mention it's starting to be miserable weather for camping. I could leave Borealis to keep you company. He's not riding too well either. And the 2 of us would murder each other in 5 days. No, I'll keep going. Doleg smiled. I thought as much. Borealis won't stop either. Much for the same reasons you give. I don't want her to slow our pace either. Third God's Toad, no, don't do that. The thought that I've only 4 or 5 more nights to go is pretty near all that keeps me going. No, I don't think we can execute Oring-Fa. In theory, since he was involved in an attempt on my life, we could do so. But we'd be much better having Teva-Tru ransom him back. Osban Isger frowned, an expression that turned his lean face exceedingly sad. A bad precedent, Lord Prince. It doesn't precisely constitute a precedent. Oring-Fa is not an ordinary citizen of Lengthwheel. That makes a difference. Will everyone see the difference? Might someone not say Oring-Fa got involved in an attempt on the prince's life and got off with the equivalent of a stiff fine? If they do, they'll find out differently. A person who can't see the distinction is likely to be such a fool as to be little danger. Even a fool may be lucky, Lord Prince. Doleg shook his head. No, my decision is made. Be sure that Oringfa is locked up and carefully guarded. Tevatru looked up from the paper in his hand and up at the officer in front of him. The Emperor extended the paper, and a servant took it and carried it to the officer. These people, have them arrested and executed. No trial, August Ruler? No trial. The evidence against them is such that no trial is necessary. Yes, August Ruler. In fact, the evidence against some of them was rather thin. The ill-fated campaign against the Ghaznavids had caused a certain amount of disaffection, however. Having some of the conspirators arrested and summarily executed would give pause to other plotters, both actual and potential, he hoped. Something would have to be done about this Doleg fellow up in Lengthwheel, too. No, war was not feasible. Not just yet. Another set of assassins might be a good notion, though. The jumped-up tent-dwelling barbarians had had too much luck against assassination. But that luck ought to be due to run out. Tevatru closed his eyes and thought. News from the north said that the Lantha had just handed the Nanisses a pair of severe defeats. That being so, what had that griping been about not having funds to fight these barbarians? Obviously, this had been a plan prepared in advance to catch the Empire in the middle of a war, then pull the whole north out of the Empire. They'd been even more fortunate in the fortunes of war had gone against the Empire, leaving Prince Doleg time to consolidate matters. Well, he'd have to see if he could spare a little money to buy a couple of Doleg's lords. What were they called? Bozhans? Zolhans? No, Osbands. To make some trouble for him. Those fellows were always willing to pull the top man down. Doleg laid down the scroll on his desk as Osban Isdur came in. Good day, Isdur. Good day, Lord Prince. You wished to see me. Yes, I did. There seems to be some trouble between Togadai's people and ours. I had stated that they are my guests, had I not? Yes, Lord Prince. But a good many of our citizens have served a term on the frontier and have seen and heard things, the kind of things the Nanisses do. Everyone knows they're a bunch of thieves and murderers who specialize in killing, and nobody can trust them. True. Let me read you something, Isdur. He picked up the scroll, found his place, and read. They are a whole nation of thieves and liars who delight in stealing and killing. They consider it a part of their fame that they cannot be trusted to keep a bargain, even among themselves. He looked up. Do you recognize this, Isdur? Isdur's expression was puzzled. It sounds like a description of the Nanisses, Lord Prince. Actually, it's from the writings of Greg Graffa on the northern peoples, in the section describing the Lantha. What does that say to you? It says the fellow didn't really know us, Lord Prince. Doleg set the scroll down. Exactly. Just as we don't know the Nanisses, save at swords' points. It's a piece of the troubles between the followers of the divine pair and the worshippers of the third god. A person who has been of good reputation in the locality takes up with the third god, for one reason or another, and suddenly his neighbors see him as a drunkard and a ne'er-do-well. We ourselves, the main thing we know about Nanisses is that they massacre our people and destroy our villages to make more pasture for their sheep. How can such people be good for anything? He paused a moment. Now we have recovered what used to be called the Debatable Lands. Most of the Lantha who lived there have fled or are dead. Many of those who have fled will not go back, and we will have difficulty getting other people to take up land over there for a few generations. Some will, of course, but not enough to hold the territory for us. So I've made agreements with some of the Nanissas who are willing to stay there under our rule. In another generation or two, perhaps 3, they will be Lantha. We will have to learn to live with them, and they with us. That will be difficult enough without each group looking at each other and seeing subhuman beasts. This is not a matter of humoring some quirk of the Lord Prince. It's a matter of survival. You understand me, Osminister? Yes, Lord Prince. Doleg was fairly sure the man didn't understand. Not completely. But he was willing to live with it. And that would have to do for now. It's good to be home again, Herchis, suddenly realizing Plutarch was indeed home. How had that come about? Home, at some point, had ceased to be under her father's roof, up there in the north. Yes, home, Grimmy agreed. Elbdarg isn't bad, you understand, just too close to those Nanissas. But just to be sure, we brought some Nanissas along with us. You're teasing me again, Osmini. Well, I'm sure the Lord Prince has his reasons for that, though I couldn't guess what they might be, other than to have them close at hand to keep an eye on them. Herchis smiled. She herself had something of an understanding of the explanation Dolia had given her. Her own father, at the approach of the raiding season, used to say, "Now's the time we have to start thinking like the Rosh Valadi." Doleg seemed wanted to go further than putting himself in the Nanissa's boots to fight them the better. He wanted to learn to live with them, at least the ones that still lived in Lengthwheel territory. Even there, of course, the fact was that he needed these people to defend the principality against their kindred across the river. She couldn't be sure just how altruistic her husband might be, but she knew for sure, that the defense of the principality was one overriding concern for him. Her sources in the city had already told her that there was some unease about Togatai and his people. Nowhere near what the erection had been in Elbdarg, but it was there. All this brought to her another interesting thought. She'd started the information gathering business as a way to familiarize herself with the city and what went on in it. She had to admit, to find out all she could about the new prince. She really needn't bother with it any longer. She really needn't bother with it any longer then, but she was unwilling to give it up. Dolia would tell her nearly anything she asked, but Dolia was extremely busy being prince. She wouldn't want their small time together to be spent on nattering about politics and the like. She smiled slightly. No, that wasn't a good notion at all. The man before Doleg was a naval man, uncomfortable in leather boots, wearing a coat that seemed fairly well kept, save for small salt spots here and there. It took the prince a moment to dredge up his name. Ah, Captain Clishtru. Good day to you. Good day to you also, Lord Prince. You have a report for me? I have, Lord Prince. We had a meeting with the Imperial fleet. Well, not so much a meeting as a brief encounter. You see, Lord Prince, we went out looking till we saw them. Then we turned and run. They followed after us, like we knew they would. As they started to catch us up, we poured half a barrel of that devil oil over the stern. The stuff floats on water, you know, Prince. We kept going until at least a couple of the Imperial ships was in the floating oil. Then we shot flaming arrows until the stuff caught. It went up in a few heartbeats, from one end to the other. If we'd had better conditions, the oil would have spread out far enough to catch the whole fleet. But as it was, we left 3 of them burning for sure, and 2 of them far enough into the devil oil to be damaged bad. Not a trick I'd want to do too many times, but we carried it off this once, at least. We've carried it off this once, at least. Well done, Captain Clishtrue. So what can you tell me of the state of the Imperial fleet now? The captain hesitated. I wouldn't want to speak beyond my knowledge, Lord Prince. We've hurt them, that's for certain. How badly we may have hurt them, that's another. There's the winter gales to deal with too. They could try to lay up in some inlet along our coast, patch what they can, and they'd be fit to sail. They'd still be fit to fight. They'd still be fit to fight in the spring. They might be best to chance the trip across the open water to Great Medolagus, where they can be sure of being properly refitted and possibly reinforced. What would you do in their commander's place? Captain Clishtrue drew a deep breath. Wish you hadn't asked me that one, Lord Prince. Doleg smiled. No, I won't hold you responsible for what the commander of the Imperial fleet actually does. I just want your best guess to give me something to think about. The captain was still hesitant, but after a moment he said, I was him. I go around the coast to the Great Medolagus to be ready to come out twice as nasty and 3 times as wary come summer. Doleg nodded. Thank you, Captain. I'll have a gift delivered to your ship by tomorrow evening, at the latest. See that everyone gets a share in it. Yes, Lord Prince. The captain's face was expressionless. Messed up that one, Dolia. Of course he'll share it around. He didn't need you telling him how to handle his crews. Heard anything about the third Godders recently, Padra? Had ya? Very little, Dolia. An occasional bit of pushing and shoving on one in the market from one side or the other. But mostly, they're all behaving themselves. I will admit, though, that we've been lucky a time or two to have some soldiers on hand to prevent the other side from doing anything stupid. Can't count on being lucky every time, though. Doleg frowned. I suppose all this is stuff nobody wants to bother the prince about? That seems to be about it. A third god's toe. I'll have to get Borlus to make me a charm to quiet the squabbling religious zealots. Padra grinned. If only it were that easy. Doleg took a deep breath to calm himself. So, back to matters more amenable to my orders. The wagons? We have more being built and men trained to use them. Have you considered having some or all of the ballistae refitted to throw stones? Yes, you'll be happy to know that I've decided you're right. A measure of accuracy and range is a good trade for being able to carry more ammunition, not to mention resupplying the ammunition from it at any creek bed. How about more of the fire pumps? Doleg shook his head. Deadly stuff at close range, but the Nanisses likely already know about the lack of range and will just adjust their tactics to compensate. The thing for us to do is have more men in and among the wagons with crossbows, which will have as good or better range as the Nanissa bows. If we had ballistae, we could shoot it as fast as a crossbow. I'd use those. More men in the wagons? They're near overcrowded as it is. Doleg shook his head. Sorry, I wasn't making myself clear. More wagons and more crossbow men sheltering around the wagons. We'd be sacrificing a lot of mobility. We don't have 3 or 4 generations to be able to build up a mobility equal to what the Nanisses have. So long as Borlus can provide us with information on their movements, we can just make sure to match them until they have to come to battle. Or they simply ignore our army and ride on, knowing we can't catch them. So we make sure we can pick the right place to meet them at. If we do it right, we can pick off 1 or 2 small groups before they can all join together to fight us. We'll work it out. There's only so many tracks through the land between the rivers, especially for horsemen. You won't try to put everyone in wagons, will you? Not by any means. Movable forts are an advantage, for certain. We don't want to put all our money on one horse. Okay. And that's all for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. and I will talk to you again next week.